Hello, this is our presentation about Deaf President Now. So here's some background of the protest. So the people who were involved in this protest were the students and community of Gallaudet University, which is located in Washington, D.C. And students at this university protested the selection of the lone hearing person as their new president. So in the months and even years leading up to this, students in the community were excited at the prospect of getting a deaf president, as they were the only deaf university in the world, and they still continue to be the only university in the world that provides all courses specifically for deaf students. So they were very excited at the prospect of getting a deaf president. Two of the three candidates were deaf for the presidency. They had given demands before. There was even a group that had formed that was advocating for a deaf president, and they formed in the mid 1980s. And so everyone was really excited about the prospect of a deaf president. And then the Board of Trustees picked the lone hearing candidate as president. So the president was announced on March 6th in 1998. And this protest, the Deaf President Now protest, lasted for a week after this. And so the aims of the protests were to have four demands met by the university. The first being that they wanted to have a deaf president. The second was that they wanted the chairman of the Board of Trustees, Ms. Billman, to step down. They also wanted a 51% majority of deaf people on the Board of Trustees. They also wanted to make sure that no one who was involved in the protest got any sort of bad consequences from being involved in the protest. Again, Gallaudet University is in Washington, D.C. And you can see here the name of that group, the university's President's Council on Deafness, that formed in the mid-1980s that advocated for a deaf president. So people had been wanting this deaf president for quite a while, and they still got the lone hearing candidate picked. However, this protest lasted a week, and at the end of that week, all of the students' demands were met. So they got a new deaf president. They had the board chairman step down. There was a task force put together that made sure that there would be a 51% majority of deaf people on the board. And they also had no repercussions for anyone that was involved in the protest. Here are some great videos about Deaf President Now. The one on the left gives an overview of the protest as well as has some actual footage from the protest. So I would definitely recommend watching this. And then this one has some actual pictures from the protest and describes some of those events as well.
So the Deaf President Now definitely had some lasting effects on both the hearing world and the deaf community. Before the Deaf President Now movement, the hearing world had put these limitations on the deaf community because they looked at their incapabilities rather than their capabilities first. Hearing people didn't understand that the fact that the only thing a deaf person can't do is hear. The Deaf President Now movement allowed the hearing world to see that they were more than their incapabilities, and they were determined people to get what they want and get what they were advocating for, which was representation, fair treatment, accessibility, and for others to view at the deaf community for all their capabilities. Another lasting social effect was the fact that the deaf students had a deaf person representing them for the first time. Because of this, deaf people began to they saw a deaf person leading them, and this gave people confidence and excitement to strive for higher education. Before Deaf President Now, there had only been a few deaf people with doctorate degrees, and after Deaf President Now, there's too many to count, and people became really excited for the possibilities after Deaf President Now. Some political lasting effects because of Deaf President Now. American Congress really saw this as a civil rights movement, and they began to recognize the changes that the deaf community were pushing for. A number of laws were passed within a 5-year span right after the Deaf President Now movement occurred. Some of these acts were the Telecommunications Accessibility Enhancement Act, which allowed for interpreters and closed captioning to be on TV. The Television Decoder Circuitry Act happened after that, and the American with Disabilities Act was passed in the year 1990. The Deaf President Now had a many number of effects. It inspired the deaf community and inspired the hearing community to take a minute and listen to what the deaf community were asking for, and to ensure that there was fair treatment being done across all boards.
For the years of 1988 to 1993, many new laws and bills were changed and proposed to ensure the equality for the deaf community. A couple of those bills that were proposed were the Telecommunications Accessibility Enhancement Act, which it required for national telecommunications to be available to all deaf and hard of hearing people. And then the Television Decoder Circuitry Act required for chips to be inserted into all machines that had a screen 13 inches or greater to ensure that they had closed captioning for the deaf community to be able to understand what was going on without having to lip read in the videos. A couple other landmark events that occurred because of Deaf President Now were that it really gave the deaf community a sense of pride that they were able to accomplish something that perhaps many in the hearing community never thought would be possible. The hearing community, I think, after they saw what the students at the university were doing and saw their protests, respected them more, and realized what the deaf community knew all along, which was that they were capable of doing everything that a hearing person could do. Some current, one second. Some current issues that the deaf community is currently facing, mainly one, because of the national or the worldwide pandemic that is going on, is the mask mandates. So in the bottom right, there's a picture of a girl who had made masks for those in the deaf community to be able to see facial expressions, since that is one of the key components of American Sign Language. And because of that, many deaf people were still able to protect themselves from the COVID-19 virus while also being able to communicate with each other. Now, it wasn't ideal as not wearing a mask, but it's about the best that they could get, along with face shields, but sometimes those tend to get in the way when doing certain signs. Some other health-related issues that the deaf community is facing are captioning. So back in 2011, a team of researchers proposed some new implications that they would like to see to ensure the equality for the deaf and hard of hearing community. And captions on national health mandates or debates, and like including interpreters were important in making that possible. Another health related issue is that not many deaf people are involved in medical surveys, so gaining more information as to what they think or what they're going through would help with equality in that aspect. Also, they could use more funding for devices to ensure that at all times those in the deaf community are able to fully communicate with the hearing community, because there might not always be an interpreter around or someone who is also deaf. The fourth issue or fourth proposition made was for more deaf people to go into the healthcare workforce, and in that way they can ensure that anyone that comes in the hospital who may be deaf or hard of hearing is able to communicate with someone and not sit there nervous, scared of what might be going on. So, thank you for watching our presentation.